We're going to go over some of the basics of laying glass block. When you stock your material, leave them in the box. The laborers should cut the lids off the box and set the boxes right on the scaffold. If you have the laborers take them out and stack up the glass, they can chip, they can crack. If you have the ability to have the guy just pull them out of the box and hand them to you, that's better because you can pick up time. We oftentimes have more laborers than masons when we're doing glass block. Do a big glass block panel, which is what we do a lot of. This scenario, I'm doing a small panel. That's for demonstration purposes only. Something this small, we would order it prefabricated. So typically we're doing big panels, we're using spacers, which I'll get to, and a mason could put 400 or 500 block in by lunchtime. That means he needs 2 helpers, and I'll get into why. Furthermore, it's going to take all 3 of you to strike and wipe them in the afternoon. One thing I want you to notice when you're laying the block is whether or not it has white frosting here. Now typically we're using white mortar. Of course this is in the training room with the training mortar. But these clear glass block, if there's a hole in your mortar joint, you could see it. So to prevent that from happening, most glass block companies put a white frosting here. Occasionally we'll get a block that does not have the frosting. If it does not have the frosting, it's absolutely critical that you prime your joint. And when I say prime your joint, that means give it a good one of those before you really put your head joint on. Mortar control is very important when you're laying glass block because there's no holes in the bottom of the glass block like a brick for the mortar to ooze up into. So if you put too much mortar down, you're really going to struggle to get your height where you want it. The first course is absolutely critical to be perfect. The reason being, we want to use the spacers. And if the first course is off, then the spacers are going to be off every course above. Keep it as clean as you can. Keep the joints as full as you can. You really got to watch your glass in your line. Put your eye on it good. Just like any other unit, you want to double butter your closures so that they get a good bite. You can't squeeze that block into the next one, so you really need to rely on that. But sometimes what happens is you have a collection of mortar, so don't be afraid to remove some of that mortar right there so that as you push this next block down, you don't have too much mortar in that location. Now, if you're using the spacers, which we most often are, you want to put them in rather quickly to make sure that they fit in your joints and that your joints are spaced correctly. In fact, sometimes you can even take a spacer as you go with you. When you put the spacer in, this part goes down. The reason that that goes down is so that if you have wire reinforcement, like a 4-inch block would usually have wire. So after we get our spacers in, we would lay a piece of wire in there. Once your spacers are in, it's time to lay the next course. The biggest thing to remember, what I like to do is do the first course a day ahead, especially if you're doing a lot of panels and you can have a full day of doing the first course. The biggest thing to remember, as I was saying, is you are not laying glass block. You are stacking glass on plastic. Stacking glass on plastic. This does not take a skilled mason. It takes a skilled mason to get the first course down, and after that, anyone can make time on this because you're stacking glass on plastic. And I say that so much because the number one thing, and this is where a skilled mason comes into play with his trowel, is you can't get mortar on the plastic. You can't have any mortar between the plastic and the glass. You have to be, even if it means you have to hold back mortar and point more in later, that's okay. So you're going to spread a real thin spread in the middle. And this training mortar makes it a little difficult for me to demonstrate correctly. See, I got mortar on the plastic. That's a no-no. So I'm going to have to remove that mortar before I proceed. It's absolutely critical that I do not have mortar on the plastic. Whenever we're at our ends, what we want to do is this piece here will break off easily. So you remove that to do your end pieces. It's critical that you put the spacers on the end. A lot of people want to skip them, but the problem is if everything else is on a spacer, then as you continue to go up, this is going to want to sink. Got to remove my mortar. Plastic on glass, glass on plastic, no mortar in between. That's rule number one when you're working with this. This might even be too much mortar because it might ooze onto there. Hold your mortar back in those locations. You'll get into a good rhythm of spreading thin. I talked about stacking glass on plastic. In this scenario, I am putting mortar where I'm butting up against the end or the jamb. That's optional at this point. And I will not be using mortar, making sure I don't get any mortar between my glass and my plastic. Some lumps in the training mortar need tapped out. But what you're going to do on a wall like this is you are going to not put any head joints in at this point. You're just going to stack the glass and make sure that you get it where you want it. Okay, now that I have all my glass stacked, we're going to take a grout bag and fill the centers. This helps us pick up time, and it helps us keep the face of the block clean and keep our head joint mortar from getting on the plastic. This is not so difficult in a real life setting because you should have 2 helpers for every mason. So as the mason is stacking the glass, you can have a helper coming behind him filling the centers. You can have a helper handing him glass block. I mentioned before, you're going to need that help because it's going to take a long time to clean them. So you want to shove your bag way down in there and you want to squeeze, fill this full. And this ensures that you have a good full joint all the way through. And one thing that I like to do is easier on the 4-inch is you have this rib here. So do your front half and then do your back half. You can see that produces a much fuller joint than just doing it in the middle. It's a little bit difficult on these 3-inch. We rarely do this on 3-inch because 3-inch is usually a small window and we just lay it normal. I'm demonstrating how we would do a large panel with the spacers. If you have a void like this, you always keep your bag clean, stick it in. Remember, always fill your joints from the inside out. Don't try to get them from the outside in. You'll have voids all through it. So now I'm going to show you a trick. Let's pretend this is the last block in a wall or a window, and there's a header here. And we have to shove that last piece of glass block in. A lot of people will struggle. They will do this business and shove it in and get someone on the other side. You hold it, you tap, a little to me, a little to you. That's a lot of craziness. There's a simple trick to help you avoid that. What you do is you take a glass block and you lay it down and you tie a piece of string around it just like this. And then you put a little bit of mortar on it. And from your own side, you don't need a line, obviously, for the closure. Make sure you take your tabs off. Make sure you don't have any glass on there. And then you can very easily, whoops, let me move some of that mortar where the plastic goes. Remember, no mortar on the plastic. And then you can shove it straight in to the wall. And then you have the ability to maneuver it with this string. See, I can pull it in and out. So if I push it in too far, I can pull it out. I can maneuver it with the string. And when I have the block set the way I want it, then I can cut the piece of string off and tuck the mortar joint. A lot of times on the last course, we don't use the spacers. It's much easier for the last course without the spacers. You also don't have to worry about the weight. Spacers are absolutely critical if you're going high because the glass does not suck the moisture out of the mortar. So as you continue to go high and put weight of glass on the wall, this mortar will just ooze right out and the whole thing will sink and sag. You don't have to worry about that on the last course. So in a real life situation, this would have been easier because there would not have been spacers.